All right. Normally I like to walk around the stage and, lots of hand motions and everything else. So before we start, this is a safe space. So when I ask a question, it's okay to give me a little bit of feedback and interaction here. All right. So growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, yes, I'm dating myself here a little bit, I loved Star Wars. My friends wanted to be Han Solo or Luke Skywalker. Oh no, I loved C-3PO and R2-D2. I loved how the technology in the Star Wars universe seemed to just enable the characters every step of the way. But growing up in the 80s and the 90s, it didn't quite meet the expectations. I've been waiting almost 40 years for technology to finally catch up. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about a time in the very near future. And this exercise was great, back there on the back, because I'm going to give you the actual date when we're going to shift from the mobile device being the primary way in which we interact with technology to technology interacting with us. So that's the purpose of our talk today. And I like to look at the future, and it's, I used to talk a lot about how disruption is the new normal. You think about the iPhone, you think about the App Store, and how that fundamentally shifted and changed our behavior. Now, moving into the near future, it's a combination of both disruption and acceleration. So when I think about technology, I like to use three specific filters. Technology that empowers us as individuals. Exponential technology, that's all about intelligence accelerating the world around us. And enhanced. Enhanced is all forms of spatial computing. So that's extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, any type of reality you can think of, that's what we'll talk about. So we're going to start with technology that empowers. And I'm actually going to start with Gen Z. I have 3 kids. I've got a 16, a 14, and an 11-year-old. So this is them. This picture's a little bit old, a little bit dated. But Gen Z, born 1996 to 2010, they're the first mobile-first generation. They learned to swipe before they learned to speak. And they're going to represent 40% of consumers by next year, 40%. Their behaviors and expectations associated with technology is going to have a significant impact on behavior and how we adopt technology moving forward. Spend 2.5 hours a day with on-demand content. Hour and a half a day gaming. Quick aside, my oldest son Gavin wants to be a professional esports athlete. Any other people here with kids are aspiring to be, yes, esport athletes, yes? All right. So you can imagine how that conversation went with my wife, like, oh, hey, Mom, I want to be an esports athlete. No. But he's like, wait for it. It's athletics of the mind. It was like, that was it. So an hour and a half a day gaming, 2.5 hours a day of on-demand content, and 51 minutes a day with music. Music is the #1 use case for smart speakers and Gen Z. And we'll get a lot into the role that voice is going to play here in a few minutes. But the key thing to take away here is it's about control. Whenever I was growing up and wanted to watch giant robot shows, if I missed a show, I'd have to wait months to catch up. Now, everything's on demand, we can binge watch, and we can just go. So this expectation of control is there. The other thing that's shifting is the idea of the camera. When we think about the camera, we think about it as a capture device. But from a Gen Z perspective, it's become the new home screen. And it's more about creation versus just pushing content. So if you're thinking about communication, it's an incredibly important thing to remember. 69% of them are essentially view the camera as a platform. 66% have their own YouTube channel. So again, we think about capture, but again, they think about it in terms of communication. So if you told me, 20 years ago that the primary way in which my daughter would communicate with her friends is face-to-face, and she'd have the camera popped up on her dresser and just talk for hours with her friends while they just do chore tasks, it just blows my mind. But that's the new normal. So as we think about the role of the camera, expression. Why is Apple spending millions of dollars advertising Animoji and Memoji? Because they understand that a lot of adoption of technology, normally it's around removing a barrier and building on something familiar. Here, it's about understanding that adoption, especially mass adoption, really comes from kind of playing with and becoming familiar with the technology. You see it here, you saw it with Pokemon Go with 50 million people. Any Pokemon Go players in the room? I told you, it's a safe space. It's okay. Level 33 trainer? Yeah, one in the back. All right, thank you. Love it. Go Pikachu. All right. So also you think about the camera from an immersive experience perspective. The one thing to really understand, back in 2007, everybody thought the iPhone was the big disruption. The actual disruption was the App Store. because the App Store allowed for an ecosystem to be developed. It allowed for personalization. And that's what's happening right now from an immersive experience and technology perspective. The hardware is progressing so fast. It used to be when I launched augmented reality experiences for Volkswagen way back in the mid-2000s, it took an application and an engine and an animation and everything I had to do to get it to work, and you had to scan a glyph. Now you can execute AR directly from a browser. So the hardware is accelerated. So that's a key point to consider, is this democratization is incredibly key to watch, because that is the trigger. When you start seeing the ecosystems beginning to develop and you start seeing this is where you start seeing this acceleration. Each time it happens, the time frame to adoption is getting shorter. So the first thing to take away from the Empower section is that the camera is about to be a bridge towards intelligence. So that's a key point. All right, let's move into exponential. We're going to go pretty quick here. This is 20 minutes, but there's a lot of content. So exponential, again, is all about intelligent systems, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about AI. So a lot of people have preconceived notions about what AI actually is, and we could have a whole just talk specifically about this, the technology, the applications, the use cases, the role of data, etc. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but understand this. AI-based systems will represent about, it's like $36 billion in 2020. It'll accelerate to $127 billion in 5 years. So, and then you start thinking about the implications of just the technology being everywhere, and I'll touch on that. There are 3 types of AI to consider. There's artificial narrow intelligence. Think about Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant. There's artificial general intelligence, which supposedly is going to come online mid-2020. That's essentially tying together all of the computing power of humans into one specific entity. And then here's what everybody kind of immediately goes to. That's the HAL 9000, that's the machines from the Matrix, that's the Terminator. It's this idea of super AI. I'm not a big believer in super AI. I'm more of a believer in intelligence augmentation. But I always like to have familiar references during the course of a talk. So how many people like Pixar movies? Yeah? Show of hands? Yeah? How many people are familiar with the Pixar theory? 1, 2, great. All right, 3. The Pixar theory states that every single Pixar movie exists within the same timeline. And it actually shows the rise and fall and rise again of humanity. So like, whoa, what just happened? So if you have time a little bit later today in a break or something, definitely check out on YouTube, Pixar theory, really great. What does it have to do with AI? So I was watching The Incredibles and it hit me. And spoiler alert for anybody who's not seen Incredibles 2, there is going to be a spoiler on the next slide. So like a YouTube video, cover your ears for the next 2 minutes, whatever, it's fine. But what I noticed is that within the first Incredibles, artificial intelligence was introduced. But in Incredibles 2, the master plan was introduced here. It's not about violence, it's not about this, that. I've actually done a lot of research across cross-generational cohorts. And the one consistent thing across everybody, it's ease. Ease and convenience is what's going to lead to adoption of artificial intelligence-based systems. And it's about to be everywhere. So Gen Z wants to use basically AI to schedule personal time. Millennials want to replenish purchases. They just want to offload responsibility and have a system basically replenish this for them. Gen Z wants to manage finances. But ease and convenience is the key. So we're actually in a golden age of AI, and there are 3 reasons for that right now. The first is the cost of graphical processing units. That's gone down significantly. That's where you can essentially do dual processing, visualize imagery, and process information. The second point to consider is that data is oil for AI. This is, if you're going to take one thing away from this section, this is the most important thing. Having a core approach to both structured and unstructured data, understanding how that then applies to the different use cases that you're trying to develop from an innovation perspective is incredibly key. Using unstructured data and machine learning to basically look at and identify white space, understand kind of conversation, how that then applies into the innovation approach, incredibly important. And I've been doing this for the past 3 years across a number of different machine learning algorithms. And machine learning, it just really quick crash course. Machine learning is simply a human-coded algorithm. A human is weighting the different inputs, and you're able to look at themes, perceptions, occasions, basically process massive amounts of data very quickly. Deep learning is where the systems are training themselves. That's where you've seen the systems playing games, that's where you've seen AlphaGo and some of the others. And again, one of the most important things is having actionable data assets to be able to feed into the systems, because what you put in is what's going to help drive the training of the various models. And the number one thing that's going to drive ease and convenience, and this is the real key here, this is the thing to really watch, how adaptable the systems become to us and our lives. That's incredibly important. So there's a lot of work. I was just at CES a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of work being done around predictive systems and predictive APIs. So this is one piece that is incredibly important. I touched on intelligence augmentation. And this, again, was from CES. AI was everywhere. That was one of the macro themes from the show. It was in hearing aids. It was in cameras. It was upscaling 4K to 8K televisions. But most importantly, even here, yes. What you're looking at on the screen is the NUMI 2.0 toilet. And yes, I love this description. It's somewhere between luxury and excess. But hey, it's also Alexa enabled, so there you go. So there it is. So as we think about exponential and this acceleration, we think really around three core things. It's moving from desktop and mobile to voice, vision, and touch. We're going to start with voice, because that's what's driving the most mass adoption right now. Back in 2016, that was the year of the chatbot and conversational experiences. So it feels safe, and there's an expectation now. Social messaging has actually surpassed social media in terms of active users. That happened in 2016, so we're in 2019. So again, having an approach and a strategy to find how you actually can interact directly. 69% of millennials want to have an on-demand conversation at any point throughout the day. So understanding the role, and that was just a baseline. Those were fueled by AI-based, really rudimentary AI-based engines. Now, how many people own a smart speaker in their home? That can be an Amazon Echo, that can be a Dot, that can be a Google. When I asked this question 2 years ago, maybe only a couple people raised their hand. Now over 58 million people have smart speakers. And of those that have smart speakers, there are 2.2. I don't know how they get to the 0.2. I think you have to cut a dot in half, but you know, hey, whatever. So there are two things to really pay attention to over the next few years when it comes to voice. So there are 90 million people using Siri and basically phone-based virtual assistants versus the smart speakers, which is 45 million using it on a monthly basis. And this is key. Apple's approach, they've built their entire ecosystem around apps. So the thing to watch is that you're looking at Siri now being an extension of applications. What Alexa and Google want to do, Alexa now has 70,000 skills, 70,000, and they have about 70% market share right now of the smart speaker market. Alexa and Google are both focused on basically disrupting the app ecosystem and lessening the dependency. And that's how you begin to see this shift towards away from the mobile device and actually virtual assistants moving to the center of operating systems. It's a really key thing to watch. So the thing with Google too to watch is everything there from a Google Assistant perspective is also tied to the Google Knowledge Graph. So when I look at and projecting out, you know, how this arms race is playing out, you see a lot, even at CES, Google basically came back strong in developing out their ecosystem. So you're seeing this happening across the board. The other thing that's happening with voice, though, is you're beginning to see cross-platform adoption. So even Samsung in their 2019 TVs, Samsung has their own virtual assistant called Bixby. They're now allowing Alexa and Google Assistant in as well. So this is all leading us to a key point here in the near future, where AI is going to be a proxy for us. This is where the predictive piece comes in. The more that technology adapts to us, the more that it seamlessly drives our lives, the more we're going to offload it. The research was overwhelming across the specific cohorts. What's going to end up happening? We're going to be very quickly in a time to where we each have individual proxies that will be interacting with other people's proxies in terms of, think about scheduling a dinner, understanding food preferences, understanding favorite locations, aligning all of that behind the scenes to where you don't even have to worry about that. That's coming very quickly. And from a marketing perspective, which is where I focus a lot of time, thinking about, we normally talk about the consumer in the center, now it's about essentially marketing not only to consumers, but also to their proxies. And that is a whole different idea of how you actually can convince a system to do something. So again, there's also going to be a really core alignment between the proxy web and spatial computing. So we're going to get into that right now with enhanced. Enhanced is all about the various realities. And what we're really looking at here is, again, bringing it back to the camera. The camera as an aperture to the world, but then applying that with a virtual assistant makes it intelligent. So what you're able to do now is you're able to now take visual cues and essentially understand your environment and adapt to it. And that then applies into computer vision, which is a subset of AI. So now you're able to pull out high-dimensional elements from your environment and essentially begin to understand this is how the Amazon Go concept store works. So essentially you can come in, there's a system that's processing all of this information, understands everything in real time, and is able to track that. So as you're moving now into this idea of all of the spatial computing, everything from audio augmented reality to virtual reality to mixed reality, hyper reality, all the various realities. This was at CES a few weeks ago. This is the Vuzix glass here, essentially, to where you're able to look at specific objects, television objects, whatever else, and you can see there in the far right, you can see the little overlay within the glass. To me, there are a lot of patents being filed right now around glass form factors, but I'm a believer that it's not going to be glasses, it's going to be a contact. That's essentially going to be the core driver that allows us to scale out. So a little preview there. Location and connectivity. When you start thinking about the combination of physical and digital, it's about understanding location. Location data is key. And that's where 5G, that's where edge computing, that's where all of these things to where you can have distributed computing all coming aligned is what's going to allow us to get to this point to where this idea of spatial computing, basically interacting with your core area around you, can really come to life. So another thing at CES was volumetric and spatial capture. Understanding, again, your environment, being able to capture that, digitize that, and then being able to render it in a way that it's in real time can interact spatially with everything around you. So you can begin to see how the framework is being laid for a time very shortly whenever augmented reality is going to be a primary way in which we can just view the world. So here, it's also about touch. Right now, there are various touch-based interfaces, but what's coming, and this is from Google, are gesture-based interfaces. This is all about our environment adapting to us versus us adapting to it. So you can begin to see here just by the simple movement of a finger, by talking, by doing all these other things, we're not as reliant on a single form factor to input information and move it forward. So we have mixed reality, which is essentially the ability to kind of take and interact, and you can begin to see how this is all kind of coming aligned here. You have hyper reality. If any of you have had the opportunity to do the Void experience, it's amazing. It's fully immersive. You're wearing a haptic suit. You can basically shoot. I looked over at my kids were stormtroopers. It's an unbelievable kind of combination of physical and digital. One of the big trends to watch in 2019 and beyond is digital twins. Digital twins, normally from an industrial perspective, is tied into the idea of simulation, simulating physical and digital systems. What I see actually happening is I see a combination of the proxies, the virtual assistants, aligning with understanding your preferences and allowing for actual simulation to occur in a location. This is how you get to personalization at scale through extended reality. An example I like to use is Target goes really big when Star Wars comes out. They paper the store and all things. Instead of having to do that physically, now virtual assistant knows my preferences. I love Star Wars. I walk into the store. It can completely basically redefine the physical space and take me exactly where I need to go. And this is happening now to where you've got essentially indoor autonomous mapping robots that can actually take and apply that. And ultimately, we're driving towards this idea of synthetic reality. Again, it's the combination of merging of physical and digital together. So, and this is just a brain control interface that's aligning. My thoughts are what's actually making the car go and accelerate and aligning with a physical controller. But how will we evolve? For the last 20 years, I've had 18 different mobile devices, and the one thing that's been incredibly consistent is the operating system. What's going to happen is we're going to shift away from native applications and move to what's called scenes. The virtual assistants are going to be able to take and stitch together and understand when I want to check into a flight, when I want to map my route to the airport, etc., and be able to align that just aligned with my life. So when is this going to happen? Based on my research, 2028. That's when we'll hit multimodal at scale. That's when we'll hit voice, vision, and touch, and we will have an additional form factor that's going to help enable that. We're already seeing mass adoption with voice. We're seeing essentially millions and millions of individuals, 90 million on the smartphones, 48 million from a smart speaker perspective. There are all sorts of patents. Google just filed 6 more. So that was it. And then just core thing to take away, last thing, 4 things to consider. Plan, have a strategy around data. Understand and watch the role of predictive APIs that allow for adaptability. Understand that virtual assistants are going to continue to take on more responsibility from individuals. And design for physical and digital. Design for spatial computing. All right, I'm out of time, but that was fast and furious. So thank you.